This is Your Other Brothers Podcast.
Fear, you're not my lover, you're not my friend, you're not my brother. Oh, and no, there's no room here. There's a vacancy in my heart, but it ain't for fear.
Welcome, friends, to Your Other Brothers Podcast, navigating faith, homosexuality, and masculinity together. From the Jewel of the Blue Ridge, a sunny and clear, disappointingly so, Jewel of the Blue Ridge, while the rest of the country is submerged in what seems to be a snowy blanket. My name is Tom, and I am so glad you're here. From the other side of the state, the city of Oaks, it's our other brother, Ryan. Ryan, how's it going?
Great. Hello, Tom. Hello, everyone.
Hello. And I think I know Ryan's not under a blanket of snow, but I think our next brother very well may be. Let's go to the city of Forts, our other brother, Jacob. What's up, Jacob?
Hello. Yes, from the Arctic tundra that is northeast Indiana in the month of February 2021. I am still alive, and it's good to be here.
Thank you for dating the show. We appreciate the context. People listening in the year 2047, there was snow all around the country. Like even in Texas, I'm seeing Instagrams from Texas, like the deep heart of Texas, just covered in snow. Power outages, crazy times.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is this how it will be in the end of days? Maybe.
Sure.
Maybe. Y'all, so excited to be back again for another YOBcast. Hopefully people aren't confused, because now when you go to our feed, you'll find YOBcasts, you'll find convo casts. There's all kind of casts happening on our feed, and so it's good to be back for the YOBcast and to continue this new rhythm that we are in. You guys, today we have such a great episode because we are talking about belonging. Something that really, that word has struck a chord in me for years upon years upon years. I don't know how you guys feel about that word, but the word belonging is a powerful word. And we're going to dive into that concept with another guest, you guys. Are you guys down for another guest?
Always.
Always. You guys, we're talking with Gregory Coles, who just as it just so happens to be, has a book coming out. I guess this is when people are writing books. Is this like book sweeps or something? I don't know. But right on the heels of Preston Sprinkle's new book, Greg Coles has a new book, and it's all about belonging. So we're going to talk to him later in this episode. And I already know. We've already exchanged emails, the four of us, and I just have this giddy feeling that this is going to be a wonderful conversation. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I bite my tongue and eat my words at the end of it, but
Delightful. I think it'll be a delightful conversation.
Indeed. It's also great because according to the Zuniga standard, what it takes to quote unquote meet a person, I've actually met Gregory Coles because I've been in the same room as him and saw him across the room. So just like Tom has quote unquote met Chris Tomlin, I have met Gregory Coles.
Hold on.
Excited.
I have not.
Oh, sorry. Wait. You met Stephen Chris
Okay.
Chapman. Same thing, same person. You have met both of them equally.
Wrong CCM superstar.
Right.
Get it right.
Shucks. I know.
You know, we're not going to go back into that. People can listen to the monologue and decide for themselves. We'll just leave it in our yobbers' hands. So yobbers, it's up to you to determine if I've met good old SCC, as I call him. TMZ meets SCC. Yeah, it was great. Thank you for bringing that up again.
Oh, always.
So you guys, I'm not going to say the CF trigger that Jacob doesn't like. Do you know what I'm talking about, Jacob?
No, I don't.
I know what you're talking about.
It's a popular workout regimen with gyms all around the country, world even.
Way to not trigger him.
But here's something, Jacob. It's going to be a quick turnaround. You're going to be excited because what I have found to replace the gaping hole in my soul with the loss of CF is essential oils. Essential oils have come in like Jesus on a horse and just taken me into a new paradise that I am so grateful for, because I connected with someone at my church, and he's like Mr. Essential Oil. And I've gotten the rundown on all the essential oils, what they do, the scientific properties of them, and like how it affects you. And for the last couple of months, I have been all in. I'm all in on the essential oil game. And this is the thing that's bringing me life in an era where I'm not able to work out or move around as much as I wish I could, or what once was able to. Like, I feel like essential oils have reinvigorated my spirit. Like, I start every day with them. I literally sit in my giant beanbag and it diffuses into my face. And I feel like a warlock or something. Like, it's just like all this vapor in my face, and it smells good. It feels good. Yeah. Like alchemy, right? Like, I feel like an alchemist or something.
Please, nobody tell the Gospel Coalition.
They're not listening. But yeah, and then I go to bed the same way. I have a humidifier that's also doubling as a diffuser right beside my bed, and it fills me with sweet dreams. I have never had, this is a true statement, this is not hyperbole, I have never had as good sleep as I've had the last couple months. I literally, and I don't remember a time in life where this ever happened. I will literally go to bed, whatever time I go to bed. I'm not going to say that. Whenever I go to bed, I will wake up and it's morning, and there was no turning. I literally fell asleep in that same position. I didn't toss, I didn't turn. I just like collapsed like a rock, and I was out. And I firmly believe the essential oils are not to blame, but to what's the opposite of blame? But to
credit.
To credit. Yes, thank you. And Jacob, you've been into essential oils for a while. Like, what's your perspective on, on the oils? We have some oily boys out there.
Indeed. All of this is kind of mixed feelings for me, because I'm happy for you, Tom, that you have found this and you have found a lot of joy in it, and it's been helpful. But at the same time, like, you have known, and I've talked about oils in the past, but it took some random Joe at your church, who's now Mr. Oily, who now you're like, oh yeah, I'll try these. These are great, oils everywhere. But I'm here, just little old me, using oils for years, and you couldn't give a little rat's behind about oils.
Jacob, he needed a straight man to tell him about essential oils.
No, here's the thing. Here's the thing, you guys, because I will actually credit Jacob, and I will credit maybe 3 or 4 other humans throughout my life who I've been like aware of. I've been vaguely aware of this thing, essential oils. My own mother, actually, shout out to my mom. She's all into essential oils. And so I've been around the concept of oils for years now. I've never felt negative things about it. I've just always been like, okay, little drops of liquid that smell good. What's the deal? What does it do? What's the point? What's the long-term game here? And it started before I met this person in my church. I need to revise my story, because he did not turn me on to oils. I was already using oils before I met him. The problem was I was not using the right oils. And if y'all want to get in touch with me about what the right company is, I can tell you, I can give you the 411. Because I was using oils a few months before that, because I kind of was ready to start like physiologically changing my environment. Like, I needed to sleep better. I was super congested with my disease. I was having trouble sleeping. And so it started with the humidifier. And then I noticed that the humidifier doubles as a diffuser, and you can put oils on a little pad and stick it in there. And so I was like, oh, well, I might as well get some oils and start doing that. And I started doing that. And again, it smelled good. I don't know what scientifically, if it was like actually doing anything or actually helping me physiologically speaking, but I kind of liked going to bed and it's smelling good. Like, that's such a stupid, silly thing, I think. But no, I love that. I love going to bed and it just like smells good. And then same thing. Then you wake up in the morning, and it was like a process of getting just like I had this plant obsession where there's plants now in every room of my house. I now basically have a diffuser in every room of my house, my studio, my living room, my bedroom. And it's been this process of gradually expanding the smell across the entire apartment. And now I'm using like these legit oils, and I legitimately feel better. So I do credit you, Jacob, because you planted a seed, much like you plant the seed of the gospel in someone. You may not see that seed harvest for decades ahead. Yes, you plant that seed, you be faithful. And who knows what the Lord can do.
The fruit of the oil seed that I am happy to see in full blossom.
So Jacob, next time I come visit you, well, I'm going to wash your dishes.
all my dishes.
Forget.
Yep.
But after I wash your dishes, we're going to just smell oils together.
Perfect.
I get it now. I understand. I understand where you're coming from. So rest assured.
Excellent.
Ryan, what are your thoughts on oils?
I remember
You've been suspiciously
one
quiet.
time. So when I came to visit Jacob in Fort Wayne, he pulled out his big book of essential oils and showed me that there is an oil that supposedly is good for celibacy. And I don't know what that means exactly.
No.
But it's marjoram, the oil of marjoram.
Yeah.
And I every time I walk by like the essential oils section of my grocery store, I kind of like look for marjoram, but alas, they don't carry it ever. So I've yet to experiment with that.
It isn't a very popular one, probably because we're the only people in the world not having sex, and so it's not really like being used by anyone. But
wow,
it is a
I'll have
thing.
to look and see if my company has that. I'm gonna look into that. No voicemails this episode, sadly, but again, we got, and by we I said me, 26 voicemails on Christmas Day. So again, thank you guys. If you didn't hear my thanks from the last episode, thank you so much for sending those. If you guys have anything to say, either about the Preston Sprinkle episode, this episode, any episode really, give us a call at the Yob line, 706-389-8009. We would love to play your message on the show. It's so fun to hear from our listeners. Thank you guys to all of you who have already called. I definitely want y'all to feel like you can call anytime. Don't feel like you've maxed out your quota and you can't call anymore, or that you've been on the show once or twice, even some of you. Like, feel free to keep calling if you have something to say. We would love to keep extending the connection to all of you guys. So thanks guys for listening and responding, for commenting on our podcast episode pages too. It's always awesome to see folks comment. Speaking of comments on the podcast episode page, Ryan and Jacob, I texted y'all as soon as this happened because XKid7 commented on our podcast episode page. He revealed himself to be the superhero we all knew him to be, an X-Man to be. And he commented on our page. We referenced this guy as someone who rated and reviewed our show on Apple Podcasts, and it just delighted my soul to see him reveal himself on our website. So thank you, XKid7, for not only for rating and reviewing, but then also telling us who you are on the blog. It was so fun to see that happen. And so if you guys want to rate and review our show, excuse me, let me correct myself. Want to rate and review our shows, you can do that on Apple Podcasts. We would love the extra support. It really does help our shows get more and more noticed by people. So thanks to everyone who's already done that. Well over 100 ratings, reviews. We love you guys. And last announcement, our new website's officially up and running. It's been up and running for a few weeks now. And it's been great. I love things being streamlined, way easier on mobile to get around our website. Occasionally there's some kinky things. There's like weird things that are
Why do you use that word?
It has kinks. There's no other word. Jacob, I don't know where
there
you're.
There are lots of other words. Lots.
I don't know.
Any other word, actually.
I don't know.
Bugs. Just call them bugs.
There's a lot of kinky bugs on our site. So every once in a while it'll slow down. And so we're working on it. We're working on site speed and just kind of making sure everything's as streamlined as can be. But this ties into the announcement or the reminder that we have a Discord, because it was so fun. The Discordians, as I call them, the Discordians were the first ones to know that our website was live, our new website. And I remember posting the link. So I posted the new link, or I told them, I don't know if I posted the link, but I told them that yourotherbrothers.com. It was back. It was back from the dead. And literally like within 5 seconds, 10 seconds, the site crashed, and it was dead. We had like, I don't know, upwards of 10 or 15 people clicking onto the site at the same time, and it just crashed the website. It was too much for it to handle. And so that was the humble beginnings of the new Yob, was crashing because of the Discordians, who we love, but they crashed our site. But hopefully all the kinks are worked out, all the bugs, whatever you want to call them. And so I'm just super excited to continue to, now that the podcasts are back, the blog is back. Like, if you haven't been to yourotherbrothers.com in a while, go and click around and see what you find, because it's fun. It was fun to redesign. I think my favorite part of the redesign was updating our about page, because that thing hadn't been updated in like 3 years. I feel like, and a lot can change. A lot can change in a human being, but certainly in an organization in 3 years time. And so it was beyond moving. I may have teared up a couple times, updating our about page to include the journey of the last 3 years, which includes 3 retreats, which includes all these Zoom rooms and book clubs and all the community stuff that's really taken off, I would say, in the last 3 years. So it was fun to add that into our story, because that's now part of the story. Like, it used to be when we first started that blog, our story was everything pre-Yob. Like that's on the about page. You can learn about how Yob even came to be. But now the story includes people who are joining up. It includes Ryan. It includes Jacob. It includes so many others who have joined along the way, contributing in some way, shape, or form, whether on our content side or just being active and involved in our community. Like it's been fun to see the journey unfold. So thank you, all the patrons out there. I shed a lot of tears for you as I sculpted out that new about page, as it represents who we are now in the year 2021. And hopefully, fingers crossed, hopefully I update that thing again before 2024. So y'all hold me to it. If 2023 rolls around, I still haven't updated it. There's surely things that have happened in the next 2 years. So so looking forward to keeping more up to date with our about page. And finally, you guys, sponsor of this episode, because we're talking about belonging. You guys, what do you think bees long for?
Flowers.
Workers' rights.
No.
Workers' rights. The monarchy.
No, bees long for flowers. Actually was a good one. I didn't think about flowers, but no, bees long for honey, of course. Thank you, honey, for sponsoring this episode on belonging. Can't belong without it.
I love it.
Thank you.
Honey is great.
Thank you, honey. Not to be confused with the company Honey, which saves you a bunch of money when you like have the browser extension. It'll find coupon codes for you. I highly recommend
is not
that.
that is not
no, yeah, that's gonna get beeped out or something.
Yeah, honey, as in the little teddy bear hard liquid stuff that you get. That's what we're talking about. It's like gelatinous. I don't know what the right word is.
Viscous.
It's like you have to like squeeze the daylights out of it to get it out. All right, y'all, we're super excited to have our next guest. He is an author and a speaker who collaborates with organizations like Revoice and Preston Sprinkle's Center for Faith, Sexuality, and Gender. His first book is Single Gay Christian, and he has a new book out. His second book, No Longer Strangers, Finding Belonging in a World of Alienation. He lives in central Pennsylvania, my old stomping grounds of Pennsylvania, where he recently got a PhD. He is now Dr. Greg Coles. Welcome to the YOBcast.
Oh, hey, thanks for having me.
It's so good to have you. Right off the bat, we need to get clarification. So, do you go by? Are you Gregory? Are you Gregorius? What is your how should we be referring to you throughout this conversation? Dr. Gregorius. Who are you?
I think the only people who call me Dr. Coles are my students and one coworker that I used to have at the bakery I worked at for a while, who just thought it was fun to call me Dr. Coles while I was standing there over a massive bowl of buttercream icing coated in powdered sugar. He would be like, Dr. Coles, do you need more shortening over there? Yeah. But no, so here's the story about my names. I have always gone by Greg. And the only people who ever called me Gregory were people who were being facetious. I had trouble identifying as Gregory because it sounded very papal to me, and nothing against the popes. I am just not one of them. But then when I started doing some publishing and I got an agent, then my agent was like, look, I want to start pitching your work as Gregory because it makes you sound more literary. And I was like, if you must, Mike. So it's worked out well now because like, everyone I know in my life still calls me Greg. For the most part, I have friends who facetiously will be like, oh, Gregory. But most people call me Greg. But it's handy because when people talk about Gregory, I can be like, oh, they're talking about the author. So when my first book came out and a bunch of people were like, there's a new heretic afoot, then it was really tidy to make this distinction and be like, oh, they're not talking about me. Like they've never met me. They're just talking about this Gregory fellow. So it just sort of split up my lives a little bit.
Greg, okay. I hope this isn't embarrassing or like whatever, but like Ryan was actually the one, I'm going to put this on Ryan. Ryan dubbed February Greguary in the Yob community. Because here in Yob, we're talking to you on this podcast. You have a new book out. And then for our book club, we have a monthly book club in our community. And we're reading your first book, Single Gay Christian, for our book club, which actually meets very soon as of this recording. So it's just been February. I've been reading your old stuff, your new stuff, and now I'm talking to you in the flesh. And so it's the month of Greg, which I love.
I received that Greguary with joy. Brilliant, Ryan. I plan to pick that up for myself.
It's been wonderful.
Yeah. For future Februaries, you can, I don't know, make it more about you if you're not already. You can plan ahead for next February. Basically.
Can I ask, if this doesn't get us too off topic, how is you haven't had the book club meeting?
We have not had the book club yet. It could be a disaster, but it could be great.
Well, I can see it going either way, so you'll have to let me know.
No, I joke. I say that ironically because we've had four book clubs now, and they literally get better every single time. We have more people showing up. We have more substantive discussion. We've never done like a personal narrative based book before. So this is going to be fun to like kind of get a new, different type of book in the mix. So I'm excited to see what kind of conversation. I'll follow up with you and let you know.
Sweet. I want to hear how that goes.
Yeah, I'm excited. Well, let's dive into your story because you've just written this book, No Longer Strangers, and it's about belonging. And you just have such an interesting upbringing because it was kind of cool having read your first book. Like you briefly mentioned in that book, growing up as a missionary's kid, growing up in Indonesia. And I don't remember a whole lot of like, deep story details about that experience growing up. But this book was cool because you got to like dive deeper and share that part of your life, that part of your upbringing, which is super, super eclectic to say the least. So it's one thing. I was trying to like connect parts of my story, and I thought my move was dramatic because when I was 12 years old, I moved from Pennsylvania, where I grew up, to Georgia, which was like a seismic shift in cultures of like north, south, urban, rural, like there was all kinds of things happening. But then I read your book and I'm like, oh, Asia to America, like I think that's a bigger jump. So there are more drastic shifts I think that can happen.
I mean, though I will say, when I was in Asia, I used to be like, oh yeah, America, it's all basically the same compared to Asia. But then once I got to America, I was like, actually, there's a pretty distinct shift. So yeah, Asia was fascinatingly different, but in some ways, I think in some ways, once you're switching cultures regardless of how weird the transition turns out to be.
I learned so much about Indonesia from this book. I know there are many other more in-depth places where I could be learning about Indonesia, but I just learned so much about Indonesia, what it's like to grow up there and live there. And it was incredibly interesting.
I mean, I thought to myself as I was writing, I was like, how can we give Ryan a crash course in Indonesian history and culture? So I'm so pleased that it was effective.
Yeah, like learning about, like, I don't know, it was so precious. I'm just like imagining little Greg and his friend Zach running around and like open like drainage pipes and chocolate, you call them like chocolate fountains or things. Like, I don't know. It was just like, I'm trying to picture this world because I've never been to Asia. I don't know what that world is like. And you painted such a wonderful picture.
Oh, I'm so glad. I should say in defense of Asia as a whole, like obviously there's a whole lot of different Asias as it were. So not everywhere has open sewers. And where I lived was a fascinating combination of urban and rural because we lived right on the edge of a massive city. So it was like if I walked 15 minutes in one direction, I would be like very much in the heart of things in a city. And if I walked 15 minutes in the other direction, I could be like out in the rice fields. So there was a nice flexibility there to get kind of a sample platter, as it were, of life in Indonesia.
Like for you, talk about that a little bit. Like, was it normal? Did you ever like consciously have the thought growing up, like, wow, this is not what most people do, or people that are born in America, this is not the life most people live, like living in another country, growing up and like that. Like, I don't know. I'm curious, just like as you were growing up, how you assessed the world around you.
I was definitely aware of being different from the world around me. I think the thing that I found true in my own life is that when your difference or when your experience is different from the experience of other people, there's some part of your heart that wants to be like, yeah, but I'm the normal one, so everybody else ought to be understood as like weird in relation to me. So it wasn't so much that I thought like, wow, my life in Indonesia is so like weird and exciting and different. It was more like I would look at people in America and be like, oh, they must be so sad. Those poor people living in America, like I really feel for them. So gentlemen, I just want to tell you, like, I come to you with great compassion today that you didn't get to grow up in Indonesia.
Yeah.
I was so sad. Yeah.
So there was a kid in my, I want to say like third grade class or maybe second grade class who, this was in Western Massachusetts. His family had just moved from Jakarta. And so I just assumed for the longest time that Jakarta, Indonesia was a perfectly normal place to like just have moved from. And like that was part of my like mental like atlas of different places in the world. You know, before Beijing and Tokyo or whatever, there was Jakarta out there somewhere.
I mean, I love that. I feel like it would have been so refreshing for me to meet people like you when I came back to America, because a lot of the people I met when I came back to America, they would ask us things like, oh, Indonesia, like what part of Africa is that in? So one time a youth group, and this was a very kind gesture on the youth group's part. I probably shouldn't be mocking them, but I'm going to anyway. So when my brother John and I were in like middle school, there was this middle school and youth group who wrote letters to us. Like during their youth group, they all got together and wrote letters, and then they mailed them all to us. And so John and I got these letters, and the letters said things like, I've never been to Indo, but it sounds cool. Is it really all purple like on the map? There were just so many spicy lines. So John and I used to quote these lines to each other. Yeah, but if we had known cosmopolitan fellows like yourself, Ryan, we would have just been so much more comfortable.
Amazing.
That's the adjective I use to describe Ryan all the time.
Cosmopolitan.
The hair and the glasses, it really gives you that cosmopolitan look.
You talk about in the book how in that culture there is an informal caste system. And how it seems for like just because of being white, end up being in one of the upper, if not like the most upper class. And I don't often think about people from America going to other countries as missionaries and having them be seemingly almost instantly put in this like upper echelon of culture, and I would love to hear more about because I as you write, that had a huge impact on your childhood, and you didn't choose to like be in that upper caste.
Jacob, you can't just say he's white.
I can't.
I needed to sneak that in there at some point. I was like, the Mean Girls reference, loved it. I was like, yes,
just say people
thank God.
You can't just ask people why they're white.
Yeah, so why are you white, actually, is what I was going to ask. Don't put in anything that I said. I just want to know why you're white.
It's a legitimate question. I think one of the things that was very shaped by my experience growing up in Indonesia was the way that I thought about wealth. Because, well, it was hard to think of myself as wealthy, because being wealthy is one of those things that other people do, right? It's like having greener grass. Like that's for other people. You're never wealthy. You just think like I'm normal surrounded by poor people, and then there are rich people, but whatever I am is normal, even though everybody thinks that. And, they think that regardless of whether they're bringing in like 2,000 a year or 200,000 a year, they're still like, I'm normal. And everything else is defined in relation to me. So the world defined in relation to me when I was growing up was a world in which I was, wealth-wise, I was on the high side of privilege. And that meant that I was accustomed to living in a world where almost everybody around me, not only was I richer than them, but I was very obviously richer than them. Because the assumption is, oh, if you have white skin, that means you're not from here. And if you came here having white skin, number one, that means you could afford plane tickets, which is like not true for the vast majority of the people I grew up around. So there's already this obvious sense like, oh yeah, Coles must be swimming in wealth. I think I said in my book, like being white publicly where I was growing up was kind of like walking outdoors wearing like a t-shirt sewn out of $100 bills. It's just like an automatic announcement of like, I am rich, which I think it brings a certain sense of uncomfortable responsibility to feel like how, I mean, the Bible literally says, Jesus is telling people like, like, woe to you, rich, you've received your reward. And I was like, well, crap, I've received my reward. Like, what am I supposed to do about it? So there was a sort of an urgency to answer the question of like, what am I then called to do as somebody who's really obviously aware that at least in this context, I am a person of wealth, even though by American standards, my parents were not people of wealth. And I think along with that sense of responsibility, that sense of like, oh, sort of against my choice, I happen to be in this place of privilege, there was simultaneously a sense of alienation, feeling like I'm stuck being obviously different than these other people, being stuck apart from them in some way, even in the moments when I would prefer to blend in or prefer to be able to convince them like, I'm just like you, man. There was always this sort of constant awareness in my heart, like, no, I'm not just like you. And you know that, and you think that as much as I do, or even more than I do. And so I think in a way that just became one of the many manifestations in my life of reminders that I couldn't just sort of casually fit into the world around me, but that there was something, however public or private it turned out to be in any given case, there was always something that was setting me apart.
Yeah. I mean, we could nitpick. I mean, there's so many things that you write about in the book. It was cool to like, flesh out single gay Christian and like, look at all the other layers of Greg and all the other like reasons for why he does or doesn't belong. Either it's like racially, culturally, and then even with like, we can talk about the rest of the book later, but like talking about denominations and where you fit in denominationally, like that's another part of the story. And so I love just kind of like seeing all the reasons why, or all the reasons you've kind of assessed like where I belong, where I don't belong, and seeing that flesh out, because I know in my own life, I've seen all kinds of reasons not to belong. And again, compared to your story, you've been around the world. I've been around the country, and I've never felt totally settled. Like I'm still trying to figure out where do I geographically belong, if not spiritually, in a community that I'm alongside. So I'd love to hear more about that, because you talk in the book about getting dengue fever. Am I saying that right? Dengue fever?
Yeah, multiple pronunciations are acceptable, but we'll absolutely accept that one.
I Googled it quickly. I was like, I hope I'm saying it right. But Greg will correct me if I'm wrong.
Were you able to pray the dengue away?
Alas, it's among a number of things that were never prayed out of my life.
But the reason I bring that up is because I didn't know anything about this thing, this fever. But like it gets worse.
You and my doctors had that in common, I think.
Right. It like gets worse the more you get it, which like basically at this point, are you like essentially resigned to like never going back to Indonesia again? Or would you go back under certain circumstances with certain precautions in place? And like, I'm just trying to figure out, like, do you feel like that's home for you? Is it a home you can never go back to? Or like, what's like your viewpoint now on the other side of Indonesia?
Yeah, I think I'm open to doing whatever the Lord calls me into, regardless of the evident risks that may be involved in that. My sense is that barring some clear call from God, I probably would not go back to Indonesia. In fact, I haven't gone anywhere in the world where dengue is a risk. So, which again is not to say that I never could. The Lord is full of creative possibilities. But it's been ruled out as like, a nice nostalgic visit home. That no longer seems like a particularly responsible use of my time and money. And I think there has been certainly there's been some grief that came with that realization, to recognize like, oh, this place that was such a formative part of my childhood, and continues, in my memories, in some of the ways that I process life, I continue to sort of harken back to Indonesia. Even I was in Philly a couple weeks ago, finishing up the recording for the audiobook for No Longer Strangers, which was super cool. And Philly, as it turns out, has like a big Indonesian population. So within like a mile of my recording studio, I found a place where I could get like an Indonesian lunch. And then I went to this other place that makes something called martabak, which is kind of like a greasy pancake filled with chocolate and peanuts and cheese. And we're not talking like cream cheese either. I'm talking like cheese.
Okay.
So it's a little unusual to the American palate, but so wonderful. So there's like this sense of like, I started eating it and I was just like, the immediate nostalgia washes over me. And so I think there's a very real grief with saying like, as far as I understand it, I think that chapter of my life has come to a close. But I think there's a beauty there. And this is part of the dynamic that I think I'm wrestling with in the whole of the No Longer Strangers book. And I don't think I solve it in the book. I don't think I solve many things in the book. But I think it's a dynamic that I wrestle with, and I will probably continue to wrestle with in the future, probably continue to wrestle with until I die and go home to glory, is this sense in which, like we're sort of always journeying, like we're never quite getting to the end of things. And there's always, I think, a sense of homelessness, a sense that maybe we don't quite fit in the places we feel like we ought to. And the temptation for me so often has been to feel like, no, I'll finally belong when I can solve the problem. Like, should I be a Pennsylvanian or a New Yorker or an Indonesian? Those so far are my major options. I'm sort of scared that I'll end up moving to another state or country soon, and I'll be like, now I have more options. Darn it, but like, there's this temptation for me to want to be like, okay, I have this tension between these places, and the time that I'll finally belong is the time that I pick one. The time that I'll finally belong is when I say like, yes, like I feel politically homeless right now, but someday I'll finally be a full-fledged, fill in the blank. I'll finally feel super comfortable when I write this on my driver's license, and then I will belong. And until then, I'm waiting to get there. And I think a big shift in my paradigm has been to say that maybe in the sense of homelessness itself, in the sort of journeying, in the never quite fitting on earth, maybe it's in that homelessness that our belonging with Jesus is supposed to be located. Like it's precisely there, in the recognition that earth is actually not home. That is how we start to find our more permanent sense of belonging in the world. And so I think when I process the absence and in some ways the sorrowful absence of Indonesia, I think it feels like a more beautiful kind of grief, if I can hold that in my heart as one of the many things that I get to hold before Jesus and say, like, this is a way in which I feel like I don't belong. I feel like there's something that I'm longing for that I don't have yet. And there's something beautiful about holding that before Jesus and having him say, like, yeah, that's precisely the point. You have nailed it. You feel like you don't belong. Good. You got there. And so I think, I've begun to find beauty in that. Though again, I offer that not as like a sort of pronouncement of like, I've solved the problem, folks. Like everything is A-okay now. But I think, quite the reverse. Like I think that is the journey that I will continue to wrestle through. And I think maybe all of us will, to the degree that we're really actually finding Jesus.
Yeah, I loved yours explaining that context a little bit, because like I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and I go home. I usually will go home every Christmas, and there is that sense that I can go home again, even though it's changed a lot. Like I've lost a grandparent, older relatives, other cousins have moved away, so it's definitely not the same home. And so it kind of bears like the echoes and kind of it points to that sense that this isn't Earth. Planet Earth is not home, and I'm always reminded of that every time I go back to where where I was born and raised. And so it's interesting. It's fascinating to hear your perspective growing up in a country that you feel like you're barred from in some sense. So yeah. Ryan, Jacob, any other questions about either Indonesia or coming to America before we like dive into the church and stuff like that?
I mean, I did kind of want to ask where Greg identifies on the Enneagram. That doesn't really fit in with either of those topics. Just because I have, as I was reading your book, which I just want to say is incredible, like just absolutely incredible.
Oh, thanks.
I had a good sense. I thought, I think I know where he would fit in that circle. But I don't know if that's something that you even is a part of your life. Do you talk or think about the Enneagram at all?
I mean, I have a self-identification, but I feel like it seems fitting to hear your guess before. I mean, we have just seen Ryan's guess.
That feels like a really bad way to like interview anyone, is to say, hey, I am meeting you for the first time. This is who you are.
Here's the box I've just went ahead and put you in.
Because then, yes. So I mean, yeah, I just felt some really intense feelings of 4. Is that?
Oh
no, I'm wrong. I'm
fascinating.
Wrong. I can already see it in his eyes. He says, "You idiot! I'm not 4." Please.
I would never assess you as an idiot, Jacob. At least not so early in our relationship. There's still time for that later on.
That's true.
No, so I would self-identify as a 9, wing 1.
Oh, Ryan's right.
Yes, that was my guess. That's also my type, 9 wing 1.
Oh, wow, Ryan, we're like twins. And I think. I mean, I don't know as much about the Enneagram as many people who I know and love know about the Enneagram. So maybe in some way, maybe you could lavish me with more knowledge about it. Though I will say this about my understanding of the Enneagram, and in relation to some of the dynamics that come up in the book too, the sense that I want so badly to make sure that everybody is happy and everybody is okay with me, and I bear some responsibility for that. And it can be useful. It can be a helpful skill, but there comes a time at which it sort of begins to overtake me, and it's like, that is my primary goal, is just keeping all of you freaking happy. Sorry, I don't know if this is a podcast where words like frickin' are allowed, but we've already done crossed that barrier.
Tone it down, Greg.
Do we have to edit this part out?
That might wind up on the log.
Yeah.
So I think, I think some of the growth that I've experienced in my own life, even just in the past few years, since Single Gay Christian came out, which, that was a growing season for sure. I was such a neurotic mess when Single Gay Christian came out, and I'm still a neurotic mess at times in my own ways. I'm certainly not past all my neuroses, but I think beginning to try to find a healthier way of being a 9, somebody who can celebrate the opportunity to bring peace where peace is indeed a thing that ought to be brought. Somebody who can, seize upon the ability to communicate well to a variety of people, but also to begin to learn to be okay with actually having enough of your own identity as a human being that you begin to recognize that not everybody has to like you. That if you're hanging around waiting to belong until everyone finally gives you the stamp of approval, you're going to be hanging around waiting to belong for an awfully long time. So I think that's it has been, I've appreciated some of the insights of the Enneagram for that reason.
And this is a good on-topic question. So my friend Ben, shout out to Ben, friend of the show, he has a theory that belonging is just universally really important to 9s. So I'm wondering if you have like a perspective about like how being a 9 and belonging is tied to one another.
That is fascinating to me. I think here would be my tentative proposal. And again, I say this as somebody who's something of a noob vis-a-vis the Enneagram.
Sure.
I'm not sure the words noob and vis-a-vis are often used in the same sentence, but I've just done it and I'm not displeased by the choice.
You're a doctor of words.
Right tool for the job. Yeah.
I wonder if there's if for some of us the determination of our belonging tends to be more external in nature, and for others of us the determination of our belonging tends to be more internal. So maybe if there are some people who would say like my sense of belonging, my sense of fit in the world is mostly like something that I decide for myself, like, yes, now I am satisfied with how I fit in the world. And for others of us, perhaps we're more likely to look around to other people and be like, please tell me whether or not I fit in the world. I think my experience, at least in terms of my nine-ishness, has been that my nine-ishness causes me to be very much somebody who looks externally to answer the question of whether or not I belong. And so it's a very people-oriented belonging. As opposed to like when people are like, but how do you personally feel? Like, what do you want in your own life? I'm like, I don't know what I want. If somebody could tell me what I wanted, that'd be really great because I could finally figure it out.
See, Jacob, amen. That's where you went astray. Because as a 4 that I self-identify with, all of my searching for belonging is totally internal. I could be in a room of people telling me you belong. But if I don't feel it, if I don't believe it, then who cares what you say? This is about me. This is about what I feel and what I think, whether I fit in or not. And so that's kind of the different wiring that you had to look for, Jacob. So when we get our next author on the show, we can try to project who they are. But I'm glad you mentioned your book, Single Gay Christian, because you do mention that book in your second book. And I'm curious to dive into that coming out and just like what that meant for you. Because you share some stories and you share some hard stories of people who didn't receive that well. Like when you came out to your community, your church, I mean, you came out to the world essentially when you wrote that book, and you talked about it on a Facebook post and you put it out there. And so, I don't know, just like what was challenging about those times? Are you still glad you did it, or do you have any pangs of regret at all from that decision? Like, I don't know, is that something you think about a lot?
I have no regrets. Life has gotten complicated in various ways that it was not complicated before, but it has also gotten a lot more beautiful. I think, well, and so to give a little context, because I think sometimes when people would read Single Gay Christian, they would be like, oh, like what a clever and strategic sort of move this was, like what a brilliant publishing choice. Single Gay Christian was not a brilliant publishing choice in my experience of it. It was just like a grand accident. I was like very closeted, pretty much planning to stay that way. But then I was having like this grand sort of crisis of heart, just being like, I got to process through a bunch of things. And so I decided to do all my processing on paper. And then when I finished it, I was like, oh dear, I've written a book. And which is not the number one recommended way to write books for those taking notes. But I think once I had it, then I had to wrestle with like, well, now what do I do with this thing now that it's here? And there was a very real sense in which saying yes to sort of moving in that direction, essentially moving in that direction with my life. I remember I had a conversation with Wesley Hill, who was like Wes is like my number one hero. Like he was like the first person I discovered who made me feel like I was not totally insane. And so he has that special place in my heart. But Wes and I had a conversation before Single Gay Christian came out, and he was like, have you thought about the degree to which you want like this book and these sorts of things to be like an area of ministry for you? And I was like, no, I literally just like signed the book contract and was like, we'll see what happens. But there, my life sort of took a turn, and some of the things that I had envisioned myself doing before I was out suddenly became much harder to imagine as somebody who was out. There were certain contexts where I thought like, yeah, I'll fit in pretty well as like a closeted gay evangelical who just seems to be single for no particular reason. I can totally swing that. And then I came out and I was like, oh, never mind. That is no longer swingable. And so there's been a loss of some of those visions I had of what the future could be. But then at the same time, there's been doors have opened up to now be able to have kinds of interactions that feel really, really sacred to me. A couple months ago, I got this email from a young person who now we've like started emailing each other back and forth. And this is a young person who like I was the first person that they ever came out to, and I've sort of gotten to process life with them. And the fact that things like that just get to happen now. I get quite a few emails somewhere in that variety. And every time I get one, it still feels like this fresh, new, amazing, like, how on earth did I get the privilege of doing this? I think there's a kind of holiness in that. And so, so life has gotten complicated in some ways. But I wouldn't trade that complexity for anything.
Yeah. Getting those emails in your inbox, I can relate with that too. It's a special feeling to feel like you're connecting with another human story, and what a cool concept. I love it's the nineness in you. I don't know what it is, but like you talk in the book about like bringing belonging to other people, which I'm starting to get there. Like, I think I've made a lot of progress in the last couple of years, but I'm just such a self-centered person. And that's just me being super raw and vulnerable, comedic, darkly so. But
Tom, you're the only self-centered person on this podcast. So the rest of us are judging you right now.
I'm the only one.
It's embarrassing, actually.
Yeah, it's just, but yeah, I mean, it's a thing that God has like thankfully started taking the blinders off of me, that I am so focused on my own security and my own belonging. And so the concept of bringing belonging to other people, and maybe I'll give myself a little credit of just like me and my friends starting Yob and doing this thing that would bring people in and bring them home. Like I see that as like my internet ego, my internet personality being super like benevolent and helping people belong. But then it's like in my real life community, like in my church or in my city or wherever I've lived over the last decade, like that tends to be not as much the case. And so is that something I'm just curious, like, is that something you had to practice at? Does it come naturally to you to like bring people in, or do you just have an eye for the outcasts? Like I think like Jesus did, because he was always just looking like on the periphery and looking at the people didn't look at.
When I am the most like Jesus, which is alas not all of the time, but some of the time, and by the grace of God, hopefully more and more of the time as time goes on, I think I am developing that skill. One thing that I remember noticing as early on, maybe as college, I think college was the first time that I really started to think seriously about what it meant to belong somewhere. Because college was the season of my major uprooting from Indonesia to America. It was the first time I was in a place where I didn't know anybody. And I started sort of keeping an eye out for like, what are the things that help me feel like I belong? And I began to notice that things that felt like they were all about people who really, really wanted to cultivate a sense of belonging often seemed to sort of fall flat. Like I sometimes think this, I won't speak for every church context, but some church contexts that I have seen, the way things like small groups or community groups are run, sometimes they are run in a way that feels very sort of like self-centered, like this is a group of people who all got together because they just want to belong together and they just want to sort of be happy and fit together. And the sense of insularity, the sense of like inward turning that I would sometimes see in those contexts, I began to realize, I think that's actually counterproductive to achieving the kind of belonging that people are looking for. Because in my experience, the places that made me feel like I actually belonged with people tended to be places where I and other people were collectively on mission to do something meaningful together in an outward kind of way. So I think there was a lesson there to be learned that the times that I actually experience my own belonging best are somewhat counterintuitively the times that I am, in fact, maybe least focused on my own need to belong and how I can sort of conjure that up for myself. That there's actually a gift in the turning outward, in the saying, like, let me focus on others that there's a way in which Jesus sort of then comes and provides for us the belonging that we need, which I think I would argue that this is what lies at the very heart of what Paul says in Philippians chapter 2, which Philippians is like my favorite book. So if I had to quote the New Testament just like at random, I feel like 70% of my quotations would come from the book of Philippians. But there's this wonderful part in the beginning of Philippians chapter 2 where Paul, in I think it's verse 4, Paul will get to saying like, treat others as better than yourselves. Like, look not to your own interest, but to the interests of others. Like, this is the turn that he takes in verse 3 and 4. But he gets there by first saying, like, if you have any comfort from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Holy Spirit, then, and then he's like, then, you can go and do all those things. In other words, he's saying the thing that you're called to as a follower of Jesus is this outward turn, is living a life that is fundamentally not about you. But the way that that's possible, the way that you're empowered to do that is because you do have needs, but God is actually the one who comes and meets your needs, so that you're then able to go out and meet the needs of others. And so the best way to have your own needs met, weirdly enough, is to stop thinking so darn much about your own needs, and start living the outward focused life that Jesus is calling you into.
Okay, I will.
Yeah. So now's a good opportunity for me to share my favorite part of the book. And the entire book was so good. It was just poignant and relatable and funny, and some parts were heartbreaking, but like the one chapter that stood out to me was this chapter about a man named Buck. And so you describe, I'm not going to give, I won't give away spoilers, but Buck is this person you worked for as a tutor, if I recall correctly. And he had sort of like pathological liar kind of tendencies, and was like not hard to get along with, but I was reading about Buck and I thought, oh, I've known a person like that, or we've all known a Buck, right? And you talk about how he felt way closer to you than you felt with him, than you felt to him, probably. And you talk about kind of some of the red flags of why it might not be wise to get close to Buck. But then you say, still, behind all these caveats, I can't escape the feeling that I missed something when it came to Buck. Maybe I don't need to know exactly what I missed in order to know that I missed it. Maybe I don't need to answer the question so much as I need the question itself. Would Jesus have chosen to belong with Buck? And that kind of like just punched me in the gut. And the note I wrote kind of in response to that was, I hope so. Like, I hope Jesus would choose to belong with Buck, because if not, like deep down, I have a hard time convincing myself that Jesus would want to belong with me. And so I think like there's this really hard tension of like Jesus wants to belong with Buck and Jesus wants to belong with me, and yet I'm just a human and I can't provide to someone like Buck everything that he needs, and I can't provide to myself everything that I need, and yet I am called to walk on that journey of becoming more like Jesus and being his hands and feet in the world. I don't know if there's a question in there. I was just like, so that chapter was just so important to me. And I think that I want to become the kind of person who is more available to people who a lot of people aren't that available to, I guess.
Yeah. I think number one, I'm so glad you loved that chapter. That is actually one of the first chapters that I wrote for this book, and I was like, "Oh crap! I don't know if I can put that in a book." But I'm glad I did, because it has a special place in my heart. I think I know that my own tendency is to be well, I can have compassion for myself sometimes, or at the very least, I can have compassion for people who need compassion in ways similar to the ways that I need compassion. Like, even if I can't have compassion on myself, I can be like, oh, there's another like highly educated, neurotic, gay, white guy who has issues, and I feel compassion for him. And then I sort of slowly peel back the layers, and I'm like, wait, I can also have compassion for like people who are not white. Like, and there are other ways in which that group of people might need a different sort of compassion. Or like, I can also have compassion for, but I think as I sort of get further away from my own experience, it becomes ever so slightly harder for me to remind myself, like, oh yes, like this is also a kind of person that needs compassion. And I think I wrote about Buck because he represents a sort of person for whom I wasn't naturally predisposed to want to have compassion. Like, he didn't meet a lot of in many ways, he was so privileged that I was like, this guy doesn't need compassion. Like, this guy needs to be knocked down a few pegs. And he was, he was many of the things in society that I'm like, oh, that's just, like the way that he talked about women just was so revolting to me. And I was like, and so because he lived the sort of life that made me really reluctant to have compassion on him, I think it took me a much longer time to begin to ask, what does it look like for me to know somebody like that, who I'm so predisposed to not want to feel compassion toward? What does it look like for me to be compassionate even toward that kind of person? Which obviously does not mean giving them everything they want. Certainly not all of the things that Buck was asking of me, some of which were illegal. Nor does it mean affirming some of the ways in which, I think I rightly had concerns about some of the things that he did in the world, some of the ways that he inhabited society. But in retrospect, I recognize in myself that I used some of those things as an excuse to then choose not to have compassion on the human being who was behind them. And so I think the more I grapple with that, hopefully the more I prepare my heart to be the sort of heart that in the future is just a teensy bit readier to be predisposed to show compassion to the sort of people that I'm not naturally predisposed to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that is a pretty big theme in the book, and also something that I am very passionate about, is hospitality. And this is also a great time to confess that I, like Tom, am also selfish and self-centered. And while I know, who would have thought? And I am very naturally inclined to use hosting and hospitality as a way to be really impressive, do all of the right things, put on a beautiful show, cook excellent food, like have everything in such a way with the goal and the hope that, like, because of this, people will love me and will want me and will need me. And hosting and being hospitable becomes more transactionary than actually like authentically loving people. And a quote from the book that I really love, you say that hospitality risks being unimpressive in order to be present. And I think back, like, that was also like these are the theme now is ways that your book punched us. So this punch in my gut was thinking about all of the times, the things that I have hosted things where I have been so focused on being impressive that I was not actually present with the people who were there. And I think that, and I know from experience that hospitality is so connected to feeling like you belong. And you shared some beautiful stories of people who have done that for you. And so my question, I guess, is how has that shaped the way that you approach and live out hospitality in your own home, in your own space?
Yeah. I think because so much of my experience of hospitality has been that the stuff that's most meaningful to me is usually not the stuff that by like official hospitality rating standards is rated highly, right? Like when people put on a fancy show for me, it's nice. But it doesn't stick in my heart as like, oh, that was a place where I felt really welcomed, or that was a place where I really felt like I belonged. Whereas the really ordinary stuff is the kind of stuff that sort of stays with me and makes me feel like, oh yeah, like this is a place where I can fit. And I think for me, when I've sort of turned that outward, I think there was a time in my own life when I was like, okay, I clearly suck at hospitality and I'm never going to do any of it because like whatever performance is supposed to be involved, like I'm just bad at it. I'm decent at cooking. That's like all I have going for me, but also decent at cooking in like a non-fancy kind of way, like more like, hey, look, I made a big plot of slop, but it tastes really good, you know? So there was this time when I was like, oh, hospitality, like no can-do'sville for Coles, because I have this vision of what it has to be in order to count, and mine doesn't count. But I think as I've reflected on the kinds of hospitality that have actually felt truly hospitable to me, I've started to realize like, no, I think that actually is something that I can do, and indeed something that I am called to do, perhaps something that all of us are called to do to a greater degree than I used to want to admit, is to be willing to live our lives in such a way that other people are welcomed into the ordinariness of our lives. I think there's a risk involved in that, because once you've lived enough life in proximity with somebody, it becomes really hard to keep up the facade. So you have to allow for a certain amount of sincerity, a certain amount of genuineness that might be really uncomfortable. But I think when you're willing to cross that barrier and simply to be very human in proximity with another human being, then there's a lot of gift that comes with that, on both sides, for the giver and receiver of that kind of hospitable relationship. I think there's something really beautiful that comes out of it.
Yeah, that's all about being present. Like I think about Martha and Mary. That was like the whole time you were talking about Jacob. You're just like, I see so much Martha in you. fellow too. Greg, can I get you out of here on one last question?
By all means.
Okay. Because I figure predominantly, I feel like most of our audience is single. I know we have plenty of married people listening too, but I know there's a lot of single guys like us who are just feel the call, feel the conviction to celibacy and to walk out this road as singles, as celibates, until death do us part, or till God intervenes or something. And so again, this intersects with my story a little bit too. Like where's the line, I guess, because a lot of guys in our community and people listening and people in the greater Side B world, there's a lot of woundedness with the church of feeling like I don't belong. I'm different. I'm a minority. Like I need people to understand me in order to belong. And I've lived in that mindset for a while. And it's not to say that the church can't stand to educate themselves a little bit and to listen to our stories, because I think they certainly can. But I've been navigating this line in my own life of like, okay, yes, I feel different. I am different. I am a minority in a sense, but I also have, and my pastor's been super affirming to say this to me, to my face, that I have something to offer the church. I have something to bring. And maybe in my own personal life, I need to, it sounds harsh maybe to someone listening, because I want to be careful with how I word this, but to some extent, I need to get over it. I need to get over my sense of the church doesn't understand and that I'm different. And I just need to start getting involved, start connecting and start serving, because I have as much reason to be there as anyone else. And I guess for you in your own life, or advice that you would give to people who have church wounds, I guess, where do you find that line? Where do you find that difference between like, I need someone to understand me to belong versus I can just exist in my messiness and my differentness, and I can start serving and contributing. And that's how I belong too. It's one or the other. Is it both? Like how have you navigated that in your own life?
it has been really helpful for me to reflect on my own story in the context of the story of Jesus, which is not to say that, Jesus and I have walked perfectly similar lives, though I am in my 30s now. So, rocking that Jesus age. But it's been really helpful for me to reflect on the way Jesus' most sort of prominent ministry occurs in the years that his most prominent accusers show up. And there's a kind of simultaneity between the remarkable gifts that Jesus is offering the world, even before he offers us, the ultimate gift. He spends these 3 years offering these remarkable gifts to the world around him. Well, at the very same time, people are being like, "Who is this joker? He's not even a real follower of God." And Jesus does not wait for the religious community to tell him that he's A-okay to start serving the world before he starts serving the world. Jesus responds to his critics, but then he goes on and does his thing. And it is in doing his thing. I mean, when he talks about his sense of fit within the world, one of the things that he says is like, my food is to do the will of the one who sent me, right? Like I don't need to like go back home and sit down. Like he's like, I'm on a mission. I've got things to do. Like I have a sense of purpose. And he's not waiting to be permitted to have that purpose. I think there has been a time in my life, especially in the moments when I have felt most inundated with criticism, most like I was not welcome in certain Christian spaces, most wounded by some of the people around me. There has been a temptation to feel like I needed to fixate on those things in such a way that I got distracted from actually being the kind of person that God had designed me to be in the world, and to actually give the kind of gifts that I had to offer other people. And I think a really important shift in my mindset has been to say that actually the best way in which I can possibly respond to the sense that there are people who don't want me around, to the sense that there are people who misunderstand me, to the sense that there are people who criticize me, whether fairly or unfairly, truly the best thing I can do in response to that is to keep living like the person that Jesus has designed me to live like. That there's actually no better response to the accusation that you don't love Jesus than to just go on living as someone who loves Jesus anyway. And I think when we move in that direction, then we're no longer waiting for somebody else to give us permission to belong. But we actually find our belonging as we live on purpose with Jesus, who is actually the only one who's qualified to tell us whether or not we belong. And everything else, even when it hurts, becomes a little bit less important by comparison.
Amen. Well, Greg, thanks for coming on.
And this has been such a joy. I would chat with you gentlemen all night.
Aw.
Okay, let's.
Seriously, the time flew by.
Done.
Why do we have to go now?
Part 2, starting now.
No, Greg, we would love to have you back sometime. It's been really good just to dive into your story. Like, I know I'll speak for myself. Single Gay Christian was super meaningful to just read about someone else like me. A lot of similarities in those pages and those chapters, and I know a lot of guys listening agree with that as well. So thanks for writing that book. Thanks for writing this book. I highly recommend it. I've enjoyed it along with Jacob and Ryan. Mm-hmm. It's available now. They can get it everywhere, right?
All the places I know of. Yeah,
all the places. Yeah, Greg, if people want to keep up with you, what's the best way to do that?
Oh, you can. I mean, I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Oh, Twitter. When I joined Twitter, I was like, I've sold a part of my soul. And
I know.
But I mean, the Lord works even in mysterious mediums. I am in those places and locatable. You can also, if you want to get in touch with me directly, I have a website, gregcoles.com or gregorycoles.com. They both go to the same place. There's a contact form on there. And if you fill out the contact form, it literally just sends me an email. Sometimes people will send emails through there and they'll be like, I don't know if this message will get read by Greg Coles, but if Greg Coles' secretary could, and I always get these and I'm like, that's hilarious that you think somebody else reads my mail because this is literally just me. So if you want to get in touch with me, that's a way to do it. Yeah. And hopefully at some point, God willing, there will be like conferences and things where people like gather in spaces together again. It sounds fantastical. I know at this point in the world.
It sounds like a dream.
But someday I hope those things happen again. And I hope I can see you there too.
Yeah. It'd be great to see all of you guys in the same space again. That'd be so great. Yeah. Well, it's been awesome getting to connect with you, Greg. Thanks again for coming on, and hope to talk to you soon.
Yes, indeed. Thanks for having me, gentlemen. I look forward to the next conversation.
Y'all, I love Greg so much. He just has such a delightful way of like telling stories and expressing himself. And he's just so cheerful, but also very much in touch with the human side of being human, the suffering and the sorrows. And I just love how he always kind of points me back to the joy of Christ.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And like, I didn't bring it. I was in my head. I was like, do I bring this up with him? Because there's a line in the book where he quotes his friend Rachel, who also has written a book, and it's on our resources page if y'all want to check it out. But I love their relationship and their friendship, and I love how she described him. I don't know if it was in an email. I think it was in written text. I don't think it was in audible form. But she described Greg as, quote, so damn winsome. And I was like, that's 3 words to describe so damn winsome. I would say pretty much sums it up. But yeah, I was just super, super stoked that he could be on the show and talk about his book, and talk about belonging. I know that is a loaded word. It's a loaded word for me. I know it's a loaded word for a lot of you guys listening. And so I hope we get to talk more about belonging and connecting and serving and being Jesus, essentially, in the episodes and the blogs and everything we do to come. And I guess you guys, we only talk to doctors on the show now. Is that just,
which, I mean, like, honestly, I'm kind of cool with, because
are we qualified?
If I don't get my doctorate, if I don't get a doctorate, are you going to like drop me, Tom?
No, I'm just
talking
about
have just like
outsiders.
2 years to get a doctorate?
Yes. When we have guests. So like,
okay.
Yeah.
I'm not getting a doctorate.
Yeah, Jacob, if you could pass the word to your brother.
Yeah, no, I think that is for sure
next
on his agenda, is after having a child, then a PhD, I think is
Dr.
PhD in chalk art.
Yeah.
Chalk art? Yeah.
Absolutely. No, it has, I am now fully aware, because of these like highly qualified guests, that I'm actually not qualified to say anything of merit on these episodes. So from this point on, I'm going to be very quiet, because
but you know what, Jacob?
I have nothing to I have nothing to give.
You know what? God qualifies the unqualified, and he equips the called. He doesn't call the equipped.
That's not the quote, but thank you for trying. That's very sweet.
I needed to tie a bow on that really
You were
quick,
wrong, but it's very sweet.
We need to end the episode. So that was just my effort to say, okay. We're moving on. Huge thanks to Greg. If y'all want to comment on this episode, anything that you heard as we talked about belonging, go ahead to our podcast episode page at yourotherbrothers.com/podcast. Go to the episode 74 post about belonging, and tell us what you think. Tell us about belonging in the church. And we'd love to hear your perspective. If you've read Greg's book, either of his books at this point, feel free to tell us your thoughts about what you read.
Are you going to thank Honey for their sweet sponsorship?
Thank you, Honey, for sponsoring such a sweet episode. Honestly, is that not an adjective you guys would use to describe that episode? Sweet.
It was sweet.
Yeah, I would say that it was sweeter than honey from the honeycomb.
It was also not for infants under 1
correct
age. Yeah.
Was it gelatinous?
No.
Okay.
No, it was smooth yet viscous.
It was. It was.
Mhm.
It was flowing.
Well, that's all
conversation
the
flowing.
That's
with
all the
milk
time
and
that we
honey.
have, folks. So we gotta,
That's right, Jacob. We need to go. Thank you guys for listening. We'll be back soon. And I mean, we'll be back soon with the YOBcast, but we'll be back next week with another ConvoCast. So stay tuned for that. Love all you guys. Thank you for being here. For all your other brothers, my name is Tom.
This is Ryan.
This is Jacob.
Reminding you that you are not alone. Even the sparrow finds a home. See you next time, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
So long.
Thanks for listening to Your Other Brothers podcast. Our show is edited and produced by Thomas Mark Zuniga. Theme music is Fear Is Not My Lover by Nathan Rousseau. We'd love to hear your story. Comment on this or any of our episodes at yourotherbrothers.com/podcast, or share a story to play back on our show by calling us at 706-389-8009. You can also email us at podcast@yourotherbrothers.com. or write to us at Your Other Brothers, P.O. Box 843, Asheville, North Carolina 28802. If you enjoy our show, consider rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Your Other Bros. Finally, if you'd like to further support our storytelling, community building efforts, consider becoming a Yobber. Yobbers pledge monthly on Patreon and receive perks like bonus podcast content, access to a secret Facebook group, regular group calls with fellow patrons and authors, and more. Visit patreon.com/yourotherbros for more information. Until we journey next time, we're glad you're with us.